To flesh out a map, you will need some objects, such as buildings, trees, and more. Objects can either be loaded through File and Import, or by using our Prefab Importer. The Prefab Importer can be accessed through Window and Prefabs. Within this window is a complete list of available prefabs on our Mod Hub, which are filtered by categories such as buildings, furniture, tools, and more. Select a tree here and click on Import Prefab in the top left corner of the window. As usual, select the tree to the left inside the scene graph and place it with Ctrl and B and a mouse click. Press Ctrl and B once and hold the left mouse button. Pressing Ctrl once again will place the tree in a random rotation at the current location the mouse cursor is at. This is especially handy when placing lots of variants of the same object, such as trees. The object can be moved, rotated, or scaled with the help of the pivot. The same also goes for the Attributes panel to the right. Keep in mind to never change the scale of your trees on the map, since this could break their forestry functions in the game. Once there are enough trees placed, an empty transform group should be created through Create and Transform Group. Rename it to Trees and put all trees into this group by selecting them, holding down the middle mouse button and moving them into the parent group. This is a good way to keep the scene graph tidy. Next up, we will have a closer look at the mass of an object. Import a bale through the Prefab Importer. Place the bale directly in front of the camera and select it inside the scene graph. Click on the Rigid Body panel in the Attributes window to the right. A rigid body is essentially a collision, which gets calculated by the game's physics. There are 3 different types of rigid bodies: dynamic, static, and kinematic. Dynamic objects are objects on which physical forces have an effect. Static objects are the exact opposite. They are immune to any physical force. Kinematic objects are objects that can exert a physical force on other dynamic objects, but are immune to any forces themselves. Objects such as trains or AI vehicles are kinematic objects, for example. The checkboxes for Compound and Compound Child are important when using different collisions for complex objects such as tractors with different parts. This only applies to fixed objects though. Collisions for objects such as 2 axle tippers and their shafts will have to be set through joints on the model and vehicle XML, since parts of the collision are moving here. The collision checkbox activates the collision mask, whose values we can look up inside the SDK folder of the game installation path. The trigger checkbox is used to define a collision as a trigger. The restitution value defines how far an object will be pushed back once a collision occurs. The static and dynamic friction boxes are responsible for the friction of an object while it is moving or idle. These values set how fast a bale will stop rolling, for example. Linear and angular damping have a similar effect. Linear damping slows down linear movements. Angular damping slows down circular motions. The standard values should work fine for now. The density and solver iteration values are responsible for the object's mass. Center of mass is the actual center of mass. Lastly, here's an important tip. If we change any of the scaling values of an object, as we did with the water plane before, we will have to right-click on the object in the scene graph and click on Freeze Transformations to also update the collision values of that object.